Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here. So today we're going to talk about decoding threat intelligence, whatever that means. Okay, a little bit about myself. Hopefully you guys are in the right session. This is me. That's my picture. My name is Brian Lee, threat researcher with Unit 42. Hopefully you're all fairly familiar with Unit 42. If not, I'll discuss a little bit about us as well. My primary expertise is in hunting down nation-state adversaries and espionage-motivated operations. Before joining Unit 42, I was with NASA for several years. So in a security operations center, I spent years just in front of a SIM. I had 3 SIMs for some reason. I still don't know why. 10,000 events coming by me every 8 hours. Did that for a few years, so very sensitive to what goes on in a real-life operation. Went into doing threat intelligence for the agency after that, and really gave me an opportunity to discover, what are the adversaries after? What are their motivations? Who are they? What are the tactics that they're using? And after that, I had an opportunity to actually run the Security Operations Center. So that was an interesting experience. Let's just say I lasted about 11 months, and I was immediately put on high blood pressure medication. It was incredibly stressful. Apparently, managing people is way harder than managing data and computers. Data and computers don't talk back at you. People do. And you'd assume they're adults. Everyone's an adult. You'd expect them to act like an adult, but really they ended up being overgrown children, fighting over things like chairs. Chairs is a really interesting one. Very sensitive about that. They had these people with all these chairs everywhere, and they'd have to have their chair, the one with their butt print on it. And I'm just like, there are 50 chairs in this room. Just pick any one of them. No, that's my chair. Well, all right, whatever. You guys figure that out. So in any case, very sensitive to operations, very much understanding of what it takes to run a SOC, learned a lot about what not to do in a SOC as well. But again, lasted about 11 months, and I realized I need to get out of this management thing, so I ended up here in Unit 42. So first thing we usually get asked about Unit 42 is, where does the name come from? And the answer is simple. It's from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because we all know the answer is 42, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. For those of us that may be unfamiliar with this, so this is a science fiction book, and inside the book, there's a story about a race of extraterrestrial aliens, and they decide they need to learn the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So they build a supercomputer. They let it run for 10,000 years, and it comes back with 42, which begs the question, what is that question then? Huh? So we used to be the Palo Alto Network's threat intelligence team. It's extremely long. There's a lot of syllables and words in there. I don't get paid by the word when I write blogs either. So we decided we need a cool name, like everyone else. Everyone has a cool name. We love the concept of 42 being the answer to life, the universe, and everything. But we can't just be a number either, so easy answer, just throw unit in front of it. Boom, Unit 42. Okay, our mission is simple. It is world domination. I'm just kidding. It's actually to make the world a safer place. And I say this, and I'm quite serious about this. So when our team was formed, we were meant to function autonomously outside of that core business. So all the stuff that you guys are generally here for, all the firewalls and platforms and all the different security products we have, our team doesn't really know anything about that. And we're not meant to. So we're meant to take all the data that we're currently collecting from you guys, as well as our open source, and overlay that with our own expertise and our relationships, take all of that massive amount of data, go mine brand new research, so research that has not been published, that nobody knows about, and then go share it with the world for free. Yeah, it's a little crazy. When we first thought of that, that was very controversial. Why are you giving away all of this really great threat intelligence? Well, we're all facing the same types of challenges, same types of adversaries, the same types of operations against us. Why shouldn't we be sharing this? Why should we be putting this behind paywalls and subscriptions and all this nonsense? It's kind of like you're walking down the street, minding your own business, hanging out, enjoying the great weather, and someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, someone's going to punch you in the face. I'm not going to tell you where or when or how or who, but bad things are going to happen to you. If you want to know more, though, you can pay me $5. So that doesn't make any sense, right? We're all facing this type of stuff. So we want to make sure that everybody understands that there are these threats out there, that these are the ways you can protect yourself, and at the end of the day, our products will absolutely protect you the best. At least that's what I hear. So to do that, we've assembled a team, kind of like the Avengers in a way. So essentially categorized to hunters like myself who go look for these new threats, to go try to hunt down all these interesting adversaries that are out there. And we work in conjunction with our reverse engineers who will literally take all of the malware samples that we find and disassemble them completely into assembly and go line by line and try to identify what all the various functions of this piece of malware does. They're very, very good at it. They are very fast as well. If any of you have worked with reverse engineers or services that do reverse engineering, their SLAs are usually pretty long, a couple days maybe a week. Our guys, because I pester them so much, usually in a couple hours. And if they don't finish it, I continuously just ask them, come on, keep going, until they give me that data, because that's what I want. I want the data. And we also have a tools team that is responsible for making sure that all of this kind of comes together and we have that underlying architecture to make sure that we can accomplish our mission. Okay, so that's Unit 42, that's myself. Now let's talk about this whole threat intel thing, or decoding it. So before we begin, I want to show this quote off here. It's pretty famous, from this guy named Sun Tzu. Yeah, he's pretty well known. He wrote this book called The Art of War. So know yourself, know your enemy, and you shall win 100 battles without loss. So just think about that as we walk through this entire presentation of how this can actually be applicable to us as defenders. Okay, so first things first, let's define threat intelligence. Now this is curious, because you put 100 vendors in a single room, and not that we have 100 vendors, but if you sat them all down, you asked them, what is threat intelligence, you would probably get 100 different definitions back. It's kind of nuts right now. But really, it's fairly simple. And I break it down into two factors. So the first part is a threat data. So this is very important here. There seems to be this strange idea that indicators or threat data, so your domains, your IPs, your hashes, file names, there's a strange push that this is threat intelligence. It's not. It really is not. All it is threat data. It's just raw data. Now, sometimes you'll get categories, this stuff is bad, this stuff is good. That's still not threat intelligence. To be threat intelligence, you have to have context. You have to have contextual data applied to that threat data to be considered threat intelligence. It's kind of like words, right? So if we use that definition of threat intelligence where threat data is threat intelligence, what you're saying is you just have a list of words. You don't know what they are, but somebody said these are all the bad words in English. Only after you understand the definition, the way that these words are used, can you now consider it as something that you know, as something like threat intelligence. And this also applies to your own data as well. It's not just adversarial data. So this is, again, one of those areas that it's a little lacking. So we spend a lot of time trying to collect data on our adversaries, all the bad guys out there, trying to figure out what are the different domains they're using, all different indicators, but we don't really spend a lot of time trying to understand our own environment. And what is our attack surface? How many endpoints do we have? Where's our perimeter? I find this is an interesting question, since today, when you really think about where your perimeter is and really think hard about it, where is it? You have the cloud today, you have mobile devices, things are just everywhere. So where is the perimeter? We have to really think about understanding both ourselves as well as the adversary. Which brings us to this. So now we're talking about how does threat intelligence actually do something for us? I mean, it's a buzzword. A lot of stuff about threat intelligence, how it's going to do all kinds of stuff. And when we start thinking about it in operational terms, though, or applying it to our workflow, we start wondering, how does this actually help us? Where does it fit into our workflow? And this is what it does for us. It allows us to understand the adversary. So now we're not just collecting threat data. We're also collecting the context, the relevance of that data. And then we're applying that to also the data that we're collecting for ourselves. So now we're really bridging that gap of understanding all this adversarial data, how does that apply to what we see within our own network? Or is it even relevant? Now we're making intelligent decisions, and what that ultimately allows us to do is really better assess our risk and mitigate it, depending upon what we know our adversaries are doing compared to what we actually have. Okay, so the next thing I want to present here is something called a sliding scale of security. So I didn't make this. This researcher named Robert M. Lee created this. And I like presenting it because I feel like it's a pretty good way to visualize how you might construct a security operation. So the first step is the architecture. So we oftentimes kind of skip this step, and it's kind of bad. I always had the joke that when I was at NASA that the Chinese had a better network map than I did. And it's because I didn't have one, right? When you go talk to a NOC, oftentimes, if you're a new SOC, they will just tell you to go away. They don't want to deal with you. And it's very hard to communicate. So architecture really is pivotal in doing proper security operations, though. Because if you don't know what's on your network, if you don't know where your perimeter is, if you don't know what your IP space is, how are you going to actually defend it? So we really have to start from the ground up of building a proper network that we know that we can defend. Without that, we're just kind of going in there blind, at which point all these other steps are kind of broken, because now we're just going off of faulty data in the first place. So the second step here is passive defense. So passive defense is really all of the automated stuff that we can do. So deploying our IDSs, our IPSs, all of our sandboxes, things like that, where we're using machines to detect and prevent these threats. We don't have humans involved yet. So we have our architecture, we've got a nice network constructed, we put our things in line now, and now we're defending. We're defending ourselves now. This is good. The next step what we do is active defense. So now that we have all of this data, we know all our architecture, we have all of our defenses up, now let's apply some human logic to it. Let's take all those logs, let's collect it, and now let's get some active response to all of that data that's going in. So everything that's not being prevented by your systems in an automated way, let's apply humans to that. And that leads us directly into this concept of threat intelligence. So now, if we go through the sliding scale, we've got a nice network, we've got our devices in there, we've got our active defense measures. Now, what if we can take all of that data that we already have from our network, from all of our devices, all of that, and we start researching and mining and trying to fill all the different gaps that we have based on what we know. So based on everything that we deployed out there, talking to our active defenders, what are they seeing? And now we're starting to try to bridge all of those so that we can move even further into really being a proactive security organization versus being reactive. And the last step in the sliding scale here, and I have to talk about it just because it's on here, is offense. This is a pretty controversial topic. It's the whole idea of hacking back or Counter-Strike, which the first time I heard that, I just thought, well, Counter-Strike, that's a pretty old video game. There's bunny hopping in there and stuff, but got to get the deagles. But in any case, controversial topic. Legality is very murky on it. I do not recommend anyone actually trying this. I know there was a bill, I think, that was submitted to allow organizations to do this, but in any case, official opinion, just don't head in that area. Okay, let's quickly talk also about a little bit what the difference of active defense versus threat intelligence is. Because this can oftentimes get murky as well. So when you've got your active defense program going, you've got people looking at your data, you've got people responding to that, it's very easy to just say, well, why can't these people also just do threat intelligence then? They're already looking at the data, they're already ingesting everything, it makes sense. But it's important to know that there's a distinction. So our active defenders, they're really more of ingesters of data. They're responding, they're being very reactive. They're putting out fires left and right. Whereas your threat intel people, they're creating research, they're creating data. They're not ingesting necessarily. They're taking everything after the fact or even before and trying to produce some sort of knowledge that can bridge a gap of where we have knowledge in our security operations. So how do we create a threat intel program then? It sounds very complicated. You have to do all these steps. And if you don't do the steps properly, you might end up with a faulty organization. So how do you do that? So it's obviously a fairly complex question, but for me, it really comes down to these three things. First is the data. Any decent threat intel guy is going to tell you, I need data. You absolutely need data. And it's not just some of the data or this type of data. I need all the data, all of the data. To be a proper threat intel team, you need as much data as you can get. And that's not just external data, but also that internal data about your own organization. And with that data, we have to combine automation. There's just no way that a single person or even a group of people can keep up with the sheer amount of data that there is out there. You have to automate. If you don't automate, you're just going to spend a lot of time reading. If you guys ever read lots of threat reports, and even our own, there's a lot of reading involved. And you just don't have enough time in the day to go through all the reports. I remember there were some reports I used to get, they're like 600 pages. How are you going to get through 600 pages in a day? You can't. And you're just sitting there, and it kind of lulls you to sleep in a way. It's pretty nice. So the third part of that is the humans, though. So once we have our data, we've identified our adversarial data. We've identified our internal data. We've automated it now. Now we've sent it somewhere. It's being ingested. It's easily accessible. Then we apply the human element. So we have to remember that our adversaries out there, they're humans. They're creating a human problem. And oftentimes, to fix a problem caused by humans, you need to get humans to solve that problem. Now, obviously, we can do a lot with just data and automation. But to be a full-blown threat intel operation, you're going to have to hire actual threat intel people. Now, that's not to say it's a zero-sum game either. So there's oftentimes this idea that either you do everything or you do none of it. And it's not true. So if we go through that sliding scale again, and we've got everything architected nicely, and we're moving into this threat intel direction, it doesn't mean, okay, well, tomorrow I'm just going to start up a threat intel team, just like that. I'm going to hire 12 people. We're going to get the best of the best. We're just going to toss money at them, and they're going to be awesome. It doesn't have to necessarily be like that. We can take some of those concepts, those core concepts of threat intelligence, of creating data to fill in, or research to fill in gaps, and maybe not necessarily create a full-blown threat intel team, but maybe in our first step, we do some ad hoc analysis. So our active defenders that we have that are already looking at that data, maybe we pull one guy off, and maybe he wants to do a further in-depth deep dive of a specific incident, and they just do it here and there, one-offs. Maybe they start collecting a little bit of data, start trying to read our blog and do these other things to better understand what our adversaries are doing. And then maybe that creates a little more momentum. So maybe we get another person that's interested in that type of work, and they take a little extra time to do a little more investigations into their incidents. We start trying to map out the data sources that we have. It's not just going out and reading blogs, but we're actually starting to automate some of the ingestion. Maybe we're starting to collect weekly data on what our endpoints look like, how many Windows systems do we have, how many Mac systems do we have, what our patch rates are. And then maybe doing that, where we start getting results from these actions, we start getting even more momentum, where we're allowed to create a full-blown threat intelligence program, where we do go hire a larger team, where we have fully mapped out data sources, where we have a full team available, where when we have incidents, we just hand it to them, and they can do all kinds of interesting threat intel stuff. So again, it's not a zero-sum game. We can take these concepts and apply it to what we already have. Now, assuming that you already have a pretty good security operations program. So with all that said, though, threat intel is not a silver bullet. And this is very important to think of because, as humans, we're pretty lazy. Humans are pretty lazy. And we oftentimes try to think of that one solution that will save us all. And if you ask vendors, too, they will tell you threat intelligence will do all kinds of fun stuff, like solve world hunger and cure cancer and do all these crazy things. And it's not. It can do a lot. It can provide some really interesting data, but it's really just a piece of that entire security puzzle of how do we defend ourselves in a proper way, in a proactive way, where we know where our risks are, where we know where we're vulnerable, where we know that these are also all the defenses that we have. This is just part of the piece of the puzzle to actually do all of that. Okay, so I want to give a quick case study on how threat intel might help your organization, because so far we've been pretty abstract about what it can really do for you. So what if we actually took a scenario where we have a threat intel team? Let's say we have a full program. We have a nice team of people, and I'm an organization, and I'm concerned about this thing called SOC group, or SOC. What is that? Okay, well, let's say I don't know. So first things first, let's identify the adversary. So here's what we know. We know that they're Russian-based. I like being able to say this now because the U.S. intelligence community has said this. So I feel comfortable saying this in a public setting. Before that, it was more of one of those accepted truths that we kind of knew was true, but we didn't really have evidence of it. But but kind of stayed away. But now I feel like I can say this pretty publicly. So we know they're Russian-based. They're likely to be state-sponsored. We know they're espionage motivated. So they want to break in, they want to destabilize, they want to gain access to your data, they want to maintain access. We know that they've been in operation for years, over a decade now, actually, so long, long time. We also know that they have many different names, also known as Fancy Bear, also known as APT-28, also known as Pawn Storm, also known as Strontium. It goes on and on. There's lots of names, and naming things is hard. It's true. I spend days naming things. I don't know why. Also called SEDNet, but we also know that there's these other tools associated with them. So let's say, I'm interested in the SOC group. I now understand who the SOC group is. I'm interested in one of their tools. I know that there's a bunch of tools that they're associated with. We know that they use Xtunnel. We know that they use ASI. That's a silly name. I didn't name that. We know they use Complex. We named that one, I believe. We know they use SOC Carburp. We sort of named that one. That one's actually fairly silly. It is a stolen, well, not stolen, but they basically grabbed an open source tool and decided to co-opt it for their own usage. Because why not? We're lazy. We know they use XAgent. We know they use, that's just letters, XSQWER. We also know they use dealer's choice. We named that one. So let's say we're very concerned about dealer's choice. So we're concerned about the SOC group, and we want to know more about dealer's choice because it's being reported out there, or one of our partners told us about it, and we're really interested in it. So here's what we know about dealer's choice so far. We know that it's being used in phishing campaigns. We know that it's a flash file embedded inside an RTF as an OLE object. We know that there's two versions of it. One that has a ton of exploit code, has 3 exploits, it has the payload. We also know there's a version that doesn't have any exploits, or malicious code for that matter. All it is a simple flash file, and it just talks back to the command and control and says, hey, here I am. And we also know it uses a specific registry key that is only associated with this attack, with these flash files. And it's meant to maintain persistence on the system. So we know these facts about this tool. We know those other facts about this adversary. So we feel like we're getting somewhere now. Okay, we know stuff. So now the next part is asking ourselves how that's relevant to us. So we already know what these adversaries are doing on the left side. On the right side, do we know what our Flash installations look like? Do we know if we even have Flash? Do we know what our patch rates are for Flash? Do we know if we're even amongst the targeted industries? And this is a kind of a more complex question than people might think, because you think, oh, well, I'm not interesting. Why would anyone attack me? But the truth is, we also have to think about all the people that we partner with, the people that we do business with, the people that we have relationships with. So even if we're not in a specific target industry, maybe we work with someone that is in the target industry. So we still have to think about that and understand that this threat is real. We also have to understand or ask ourselves, what kind of defenses do we have in place to actually neutralize this threat? So based off the data that we just outlined, where they use phishing, they use Flash, they use embedded Word docs, do we have any type of technology in place to already prevent any of this? Those are the type of questions we have to start asking ourselves before we can truly put everything together into something like this, which would be kind of like a threat and intel report that your team might generate for you. So here we see that we've got a general just outline of what the SOC group is, their AKAs, what their motivation is, what kind of tools they use. In this case, we want to talk about dealer's choice. And in this scenario that I've created, what did I write here? That we have 3 users that received an email containing a Word or an RTF with a Flash file in it. We're fairly certain it's dealer's choice. But we don't just stop there, because we've also found out what our patch rates are. We know how many installations of Flash we have, about 1250. We know that we only have a 33% patch rate. That's not great. We know that 2 of those users were unpatched. So now that tells us we might also have additional incidents on top of what we may have already detected, or maybe this is now allowing us to hunt for those new incidents that are out there. And lastly, because we did the work already and asked ourselves what kind of defenses do we already have in place, we know that these are the things that we have. Maybe it's endpoint products, maybe it's network, maybe we already have all the command and control sinkhold or blocked already, but these are defenses that we already have in place. So this seems hard. It seems pretty hard. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's not easy. So I leave you with this. Another quote from this guy named Frederick Douglass. He's kind of famous too. So if there's no struggle, there's no progress. So we have to understand it's not easy. It's not easy to just throw a bunch of money at a problem, get a bunch of technology, hire a bunch of people, and call it a day. It is hard. There's a lot of steps involved, especially considering if we think about that sliding scale again too, how much work is involved to actually create even just the framework of having a proper security organization, starting from the architecture side. I mean, it's hard, especially if you're in a legacy organization where you talk to your NOC about, let's do some network segmentation, simple things like that, and they'll tell you no. Can't do that. It's going to affect my throughput. I can't put firewalls everywhere. It's too complicated. So we really have to start from that ground up before we can even think about how do we implement threat intel into our system. We have to think about architecture. We have to think about our passive defenses, our active defenses. What kind of people do we have in those areas before thinking about, okay, let's do some threat intel. It is hard. So, last 4 things here. First thing is to understand threat data is not threat intelligence. I am going to rail on this until the day I die because I cannot accept the fact that a simple list of domains or IPs is threat intelligence. No matter how many times people want to say that, it's not threat intelligence. It is threat data, threat data. I will continuously repeat this until people start changing their ways because it bothers me. Next thing is that we have to be able to hire great people. Automation is great. We can do a lot of things with automation. Our products do a lot of automation. But at the end of the day, we still need humans. We cannot ignore the fact that we have to hire great people. We also have to understand it's not a zero-sum game. It's not all or nothing. So there's a lot of things we can already do. A lot of things that we can do with the things that we already have in place, with all of our technologies, with maybe some of the people we already have. Now, again, assuming that we're already in a good place to really think about threat intelligence. And then lastly, if we do all of these things, if we have a great network, if we have a great technology deployment, if we have some really great active monitoring, and we have a great threat intel team, what about intelligence-driven operations then? So rather than kind of blindly putting up our defenses because we've already moved into this direction, what if we started making policy and technology decisions actually based upon what our adversaries are doing to us, right? Rather than, again, just doing the standard so-called like a NIST framework where you put your IDSs up, your IPS, your sandbox, you do this whole daisy chain thing, and you just follow standard guidelines. What if you actually could tailor your security operations for your own network, for yourselves? Make it so that you know absolutely where your vulnerabilities are and completely customize it to what your operations look like and what your business needs are. It's an interesting thought. Okay. Any questions? I think I left a couple minutes. Any questions at all? No? Yes? If you have questions, there are microphones in the aisles. Okay, well, if nobody has any questions, then thank you all very much.